Greetings, everyone. I'm very excited today to be in conversation with Stefan Burns, who is an extraordinary geophysicist who I follow your YouTube channel, Stefan, and I so respect how you are able to integrate geology, space weather, astronomy, astrology, spirituality, and more. I really see you as an Aquarian innovator in this time. So thank you for the work that you're doing and for being in this conversation today.
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, thanks for everything that you do. I've learned a lot from you, as I have from many others. And so I wouldn't be able to bring all these things together as best as I can without the work of everyone else in this community. And so, um, yeah, I mean, I have my midheavens right on the cusp of Aquarius and Capricorn with Saturn there. So that is the Aquarian energy.
That's wonderful. Well, before we get into some of the topics that we want to talk about today, say a little bit about how your own journey and how you went from your job in geophysics into doing this integrative work.
Yeah, that was back in 2020, even before 2020. I started learning about, well, just in general, you learn about a lot of things with geology, geophysics. And I just felt a nudge to do more research and that my understanding was pretty incomplete because I graduated with a degree in geology right into geophysics with my job and was doing geophysical surveys among some other things that the company offered, like utility locating, which is based on geophysics because you put a electric current on a wire and then you can track out that magnetic field effectively. And so it was getting either hands-on with like geophysics or planning the surveys and collecting the data with like GPR or seismic. Um, but it's not uncommon to graduate college and then go right into field work and you're doing the data collection and the analysis and writing reports, but still not have the depth of understanding maybe that you would like because there are a lot of different fields in geophysics. You have like magnetics, and then you also have magnetotellurics, and then you have seismic, and you have resistivity, and you have GPR, and you have gravity, and there's a whole bunch. So, and each one is a whole domain, which requires a lot of research. And of course, you could go back and measure, for example, perhaps the gravity perturbations from the magnitude 9 Alaska earthquake or the magnetic field perturbation. So there's like this endless amount of information effectively on all these different domains. So I recognize that while I learned a lot and I was doing good work with my geophysics career, I felt like there was just a simple bottleneck on my understanding because I just needed to hit the books more. And so I was kind of already thinking about doing some sort of research sabbatical. I'd asked my boss, like, hey, by the way, I want to spend more of my time reading papers. And he was like, we're not hiring you to do that. Like, we want you to, you ready to like not doing your sales job? Because I was hired on to do sales and marketing. And I basically shifted my focus into doing research and demonstrations and collecting data while doing some marketing too. There's a YouTube channel for that company I built. But eventually this came to the point where the call to do this was so great that I just launched out on my own and I figured it would all work out. And that was right with, if you talk astrology, that was right with the great mutation with Jupiter and Saturn, of course, 2020, right on my MC Saturn. So I didn't know it at the time, but I had this huge activation by those guys. Um, and so then when I did start to study into astrology, because intuition guided me there, I read one of these generic like reports, and I was like, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Then eventually I learned about these things that have activated me at different times, and that's what really clicked it together. So, um, but that need to research more led me into all these different directions, because it started with Schumann resonances, but then it eventually went into the sun and space weather, and then that naturally took me into the planets and then that took me into cosmology and you know, archetypes and myth and more. So, and then I've always been, in general, just like researching into spiritual ideas, whether this is like Buddhist or Hindu or Zen, uh, Islamic, or, Christian, any of these things. I've always been researching into that as well. So it all just kind of comes together because you see how everything's connected to some degree, and because God is all things. So you really have to purposely kind of put blinders on to not see the interconnectedness of everything. And so that's just what I present on my channel as best as I can. My own effectively personal journey and research into this. And the best way I learn is to actually create some sort of final conclusion product. And so it's like, why not offer that to everybody? So that's the YouTube channel.
And you also have visited a lot of ancient sites, and I know that's influenced your work also. And you've mentioned that your trip to Egypt, and we both have a strong connection to Egypt, was a significant time for you. Can you say some about your experiences at ancient sites, but in Egypt in particular?
Yeah, there's definitely energy hotspots on the planet. And, there's all these different models that have kind of sprung up around them, like the ley line grids that converge with Giza Plateau and other spots. But in general, I felt like I really, if I wanted to understand things, I also just needed a bigger breadth of experience across different cultures and across different time. So a lot of my traveling took me to places where there were ancient Roman sites. And so I've spent a lot of time walking through ancient Roman sites, reading into the history and more. But then, of course, there's other sites too. I really am fond of the Neolithic. So anytime I go, and Europe has so many amazing history museums, and they always start with Paleolithic, then Neolithic, and then they go through the entire progression through World War II up to the modern day. And the Neolithic section and the Paleolithic section is always like just one room. And it's always the smallest, and I'll spend half my time in that museum there because that's my favorite by far. So visiting a lot of different Neolithic sites, and Egypt was just calling to me. There's a synchronicity that pulled me in. I saw the Temple of Isis in a video, and I was like, I have to go there. And 2 months later, or a month and a half later, I was there. And I went there very intentfully to connect to those energies because I already had at that point all my travel experiences of 2022, where I was connecting to some of these known ancient energy sites. And so that whole trip was very intentful, and yeah, it just seemed to trigger an energetic shift, kind of like, I guess, for me in the universe or something. I guess it's all meant to happen, but maybe it's just coincidence or not. But the YouTube channel finally started to do very well immediately after that trip. And there's also a variety of interesting things that occurred. We had that 7.8 earthquake in Turkey when I was there in Aswan. I felt that very strongly. So I was also given certain experiences that I feel like have been pretty foundational in understanding some of the full effects of these earth events, like a significant earthquake. Like they can make you feel very feverish if you're nearby, or they can totally dysregulate your system. And the electromagnetic effects explain how that can alter your biophysiology. But if I hadn't experienced that firsthand, it's easy to be like, oh, that's nonsense, especially if you're not multidisciplinary in your research. But yeah, there was big spiritual activations, and then just, yeah, things started to seemingly accelerate around the beginning of 2023 and into this moment now.
It's so interesting because when I lead trips to Egypt, that's people's experience, whether they actually delve into the history and the knowledge of the ancient temple sites or not. There's an energetic in those sites. And I've studied the work of Ibrahim Karim, who you probably know about, who really talks about the ancient temple science that was creating sacred geometry and these energetics that impact us, whether you understand them or not.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something there. And I also really liked, I need to go back. I really liked the Egypt trip though and the temples because by no means am I an expert and I can't read hieroglyphics, but there are a lot of things which are fairly easy to interpret. Like some of the iconography, the blue lotus flower, like there's certain things where it's very, or like, how they hand the ankh, they feed the ankh to like the pharaoh, like the gods. Some of these things are very clear, at least in one main interpretation. So you can go there, and so long as you've done a little bit of research into the mythos and you understand some of the symbols and kind of their connotations, you can like read it for yourself. And so I think that's really fascinating. It's not because a lot of it is pictorial. It's not like some, let's say, like cuneiform text that you can't read, right? It's a lot of it is just simply pictorial. So
Because we were more right brain dominant in ancient times, and it's more recent that we've become more left brain dominant. And that part of the shift I think we're in now is rebalancing those hemispheres. And that's part of why I think your work is so powerful because you're integrating left brain, right brain ways of knowing. And one of the things Robert Edward Grant talks about is the importance in this time of change that we're in of pattern recognition. And one of the things that really impresses me in your work is it's so much about seeing patterns and exploring patterns, whether it's planetary resonances and synodic cycles or the patterns between solar activity and earthquake activity. It seems like that's a big part of your work is seeing how those things are interconnected.
yeah, and it's a lot of it is just simply frequency. So if we have a 12-year cycle with the sun, the solar cycle, and then we have Jupiter, its orbital revolution taking 11.86 years or something like that, basically 12 years. And actually, the solar cycle is slightly shorter than 12 years on average. It's like, that's a pretty spot on alignment there. And then you have longer variations in solar activity called the Gleisberg cycle, which is every 88 to 100 years or so, you'll get a dip. And then, of course, also on the other side, a peak of gently modulated solar activity. So either it'll be a slight dip or a slight increase. So solar cycle 24, for example, 2012 to 2014 for the maximum, that was a Gleisberg cycle low. And that is connected based off of that yearly, that occurrence interval, right, about 80 to 100 years with Uranus and Neptune. Because if you put them together, then you can see how they match up. So it's some of it's simply just tracking numbers and seeing how close they are together. Like we talked about just off camera, Haumeu Maki Maki seem to have certain resonances with the Earth in that 300-year cycle. And so the more that I think half the equation is just getting all the numbers in front of you so you can see, okay, and then across different domains and seeing where they match up. But Venus cycles are really connected to solar activity on a shorter time scale. In fact, all the interplanetary resonances, including Ceres, has connections to solar activity. They seem to modulate solar activity to some degree through gravitational mechanisms. But there's also electromagnetic alterations to solar activity. For example, when Shuchen-Shan, that interstellar object, passed into our solar system, it reached its perihelion on September 9th of 2017, and we had a big 9.0 X-class flare right at that time, like within a day or two. So you have September 9th, and then you have a 9.0 X-class flare. So then you also get that pattern, the numerology presents itself. So there's just a whole bunch of these things that if you look into them, when we had Shuchen-Shan back in October, when that flew really close to the sun in between the sun and the earth, we all of a sudden had a burst of solar flares, powerful solar flares and coronal mass ejections. And typical space weather people say there's zero connection there. But like I was talking about before off camera, you read into some of the work from the best space weather people like Hans Alvin, some of the best cosmologists and physicists. They talk about how comets are made of plasma and um, if you have some really powerful electromagnetic sphere effectively come through the inner solar system, it's going to change the electric circuit dynamics of everything. And if you create an instability with an electric circuit that's connected to a sunspot, you could all of a sudden get a solar flare. So there's no reason why these things can't be connected. A lot of people just put up arbitrary distinctions between them. And so just based off of that, these planetary resonances are connected with changes to the sun, and then things like comets and stuff are also connected together and through different mechanisms. One's gravity, one's electromagnetic. But if then you take in the work of some other prominent people, like I think it's Chevetsky from like the early 1900s, talking about how solar activity affects us consciously and our health and society and more, then you can see how it all comes together. And maybe astrology needs to evolve a little bit to include some of these other things to give it a bit more validation. Not that I think it needs more validation because it's had thousands of years, but now we have a very clear link and cause and effect going all the way from archetypal astrology to straight up, we're having a revolution. So, and the sun's right in the middle of all of that. So I think it's really important.
Well, and like you're saying, Stefan, everything is interconnected, interwoven. But you also, I've heard you also talk in a few recent videos about your sense that it's all consciousness, also, that there's this intelligence that's operating and a dynamic interaction happening between the sun and the earth and the cosmos. Can you say more about your sense of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you really want to keep it simple, I mean, I'm often talking to the sun and the moon or just anything around. I think it's important to recognize the consciousness and other things and actually say like hello every now and then. But I mean, take this. I'll share two examples, and then I'll go into maybe a little bit more of a scientific version. But hey, this is my life, my personal experience. If I'm out at the beach and it's kind of cloudy, right? I'm like, man, I wish I had some sun right now. I'll literally be like, yo, Rog, like, good to see you, bro. Can you like part the clouds a little bit? And like 9 times out of 10, all of a sudden the clouds will just like push away, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, there's the sun. Like, great, thank you so much, bro. It just wants recognition. Like the sun, I feel like of all the different celestials in our neighborhood, is the one that really responds nicely to recognition. And if you give it some thanks, it'll give you 10 times more back. Um, and so I talk to the sun all the time. And I mean, if you go by sidereal, I'm a Leo there. But another example is that I had a bet. This is an interesting story. So and I have other personal experiences with this, which led me to believe that I could perhaps do this. I had a bet with a friend, a psychologist in San Francisco. He was there in SF back with the original Haight-Ashbury scene. So he's been through the entire wave, 1965, everything. So he, we met together at this place called the Water Temple. I think it's like the Polgus Water Temple on the peninsula. And I didn't know this place existed, but I was dressing up like Jesus for Halloween because I had the long hair. And I had so many comments on my trip around Europe just before I got back that I looked like Jesus. Like even at one point at the bar in Budapest, there was a line of people waiting to take a photo with me because I looked like Jesus. I didn't even have the clothes on, but people just the face, the hair, I don't know. So I was like, might as well do it, get some interesting photos. So I wanted photos in like that architectural setting back then, like ancient Greece or Rome, whatever. And so I found this water temple, which had like the marble columns and everything. So I go there, take photos. I meet this guy, and we're at the water temple, right? This is the water temple. and we had just had a long string of droughts, basically really deficient in rain. We had massive wildfires over the past few years all across California. And so he was like, and he was 100% like in like this guy is Jesus. So, because he's great. So he was like, Jesus, can you make it rain this year? Like, can you make it rain? Like, if you can make it rain, I'll treat you to something really nice. Like, we made a bet, and I originally I originally thought he was going to give me like a whole bunch of money or something. He later turned it into a very nice dinner, which was fantastic as well. But because I won the bet. But at the time I was traveling, I didn't have much money. So I was like, yeah, I could use a big paycheck. Like, all right, let's go all out. So I researched into the ancient Mesoamerican god of storms and water, and just I found the most ancient god I could find for the land, which it turns out to be Tlaloc. That's what we know. It's Tlaloc is the god of storms, fertility, rain. Um, and so I created a totem to him. Very simple. It's just like a nice wooden branch. I put like a quartz crystal in there, and I carved in his name along with the Nordic rune for water, which is Laguz. So I put some energy into this. And then I did like a 30-minute activation ceremony for this, praying for rain to come to California over the next year. Because the bet was if you can make it rain more than the average, then you'll get this prize. Which at the time I thought was going to be like thousands of dollars because he made it sound like he was rich or something. Turns out it was a really nice dinner. It was great. So the moment I left California after I did that, this is in October, the moment I left California, the massive atmospheric rivers started to hit. This is 2022. And they did not let up all winter, and we hit that average rainfall target by like February of 2023, something like that. And it had to go all the way to July, right? Because it was July to July. So I won the bet within just like a few months. And he was like, you can call it off now. Like we're flooding. But I mean, coincidence or not, I don't know. I've had plenty of experiences where like I've talked to the weather and things have happened which weren't on the forecast and it didn't look like there was going to be anything. But like once on April 20th, like we needed the rain desperately. This was even before 2022. This is 2021, I believe. But there was like a possibility of there being some sort of rain. Like you could see the potential there. And so I like prayed for it. And then all of a sudden we had rain, we had a double rainbow pop up. And so like I think that we have the ability to influence these things. I think magic still exists. And so these experiences have led me to also be open and curious about other things that if you have your left brain fully turned on, you're like, this is nonsense. I mean, I don't know, maybe it is. But
Stefan, I don't know if you're Jesus or not, but I think you're a latent shaman. I mean, I'm a shamanic practitioner, and what's so interesting in what you're describing is, I mean, many and I've actually had some training in weather work, and there's a deep, and I'm also very interested in ancient prehistoric times and cultures. And there was a natural understanding in those ancient cultures that we're in relationship with all that is, and that we can be in communication with the sun, with the weather beings. We can, and that our consciousness influences what happens around us. And that and I think this is part of what we're being called back into is how to be back in relationship with the earth, with the sky, with the sun, with all that is, and remember how to be in right relationship and harmony with it all again.
yeah, just maybe I was just resonating with the wave that was already coming through, and that's probably what it was. Is I was just destined to do that thing, right? I mean, I don't know, but either way, even in middle school, I was like the idea of being able to uh, influence the weather was captivating to me for some reason, and I remember Also, usually every fall in my hometown, we get these really windy days. It's like a hot, dry wind. That'd be like a red flag day, really. But we would get this be like this hot, dry wind, but it's really going crazy. So you're not chilled to the bone while it's happening, but it's like pretty energetic. Those are always my favorite days. I love the energy of those days because there's like this certain beautiful chaos to it. And so there's always just something resonant with me and the like weather, I guess you could say. And so I think everyone has gifts, and if they choose to explore them, I would encourage that. And just don't let yourself be limited by what you may have been programmed to believe, I guess is what I could say. I think that's where most people are, is they've been too heavily programmed and they need to break out of that. And I think that's some of the energy and the potential of the current planetary resonances is to just completely dissolve prior programming and allow a new blossoming of human creativity and potential.
Well, that's part of what I think is so important in the pioneering work that you're doing, Stefan, because you're moving out of that more limited scientific perspective, which is about a materialistic, random universe, into more of this understanding that it's everything is conscious and we're in interaction with all that is. And talk more about you're very tuned into the energies of the sun and how the sun's activity affects us here on Earth on all levels.
Yeah, so I guess I didn't answer fully your question about consciousness of the planets, the sun, the cosmos, and more, but we can get to that now, laying out the framework that our consciousness can influence the rhythms of, let's say, the Earth. And so if we learn to channel that collectively, then we can make the Earth an even more beautiful, prosperous place for everybody. But yeah, I think the sun wants recognition, ideally daily, right? Because every single day it's out there shining for us, and it wants gratitude for what that provides. Because and the sun is has a very good heart, but it also wants us to recognize and respect the power that it has, and that it can bring things to a close if it wants to. Like I've been doing more thought experimentation on the solar system and how it's much more dynamic than we currently believe it to be. We have this model of how the planets have been stuck in their positions for 4.5 whatever billion years since they first basically coalesced out of the protoplanetary or protostellar disk, right? We can call it the protosolar disk. And if you look into the mythology, we see that Uranus used to be the main god of the Greek mythology, and then it was Saturn, and then it was Jupiter. And so it's like maybe Uranus at some point actually held a more prominent position in the solar system, because Jupiter right now is in the perfect position to coordinate with the inner planets and therefore these planetary resonances that affect the sun. And of course, the sun is the coordinator of all this at the end of the day. But Jupiter is very well positioned to interact with the inner planets, but also interact behind it, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. But then Saturn's in a unique position. It's the only planet that has these really big rings. The other planets have smaller rings like Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune. They're very, very faint, but Saturn has a whole bunch of rings. And reading this book, Cosmic Plasma, this sort of dusty material is not common
Mm.
outside like the sun effectively, because when the solar system is forming, the idea is that you have everything is super ionized, very, very high energization. And the sun formed as a result of certain dust particles just forming and cooling, and they got to a certain point where all of a sudden their electromagnetic potential basically ceased to be a force that was relevant, and gravity became the dominant force. And so then they would fall down and accrete into the sun. And so the sun has this core of super dense material that formed from the accretion of this disk. And then it also drew in all this hot gas around it, hydrogen and whatever. So the planets in this idea, and this lines up perfectly with what we see observationally too, and some other things. The planets were actually the highest energy potential in the proto-solar disk in terms of material, because the stuff that dropped its energy really quick accreted to the sun. So it's the planets now may be dense in material and let's say cold, but their history is actually that of the most energetic as it relates to the birth of the solar system in many regards. But Saturn has this like shell, these very prominent rings, which is feasibly the same material or close to the same material as what should have accreted down to the sun. So you kind of wonder about how is Saturn still holding on to this? Like, what's the purpose of that? If there was like let's say there's some large galactic wave of energy that comes through because there's a larger electric circuit. It's actually multiple, right? There's an untold number. But let's say there's this surge of energy that comes through galactically for some reason. Like, is it possible that all of a sudden that material around Saturn could energize? And what would happen if it does? Now it's a different ionization. It's no longer perhaps going to be under the force of gravity. Does it like cause like an interplanetary shock wave? Like this is something that could happen in our solar system feasibly. Or you think of like the archetype of Venus and Mars and the evolution of the solar system. You have Mercury, very tiny next to the sun. You have the Earth, which is the largest inner planet and the most complex electromagnetically. Of course, then you have Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. They are all like their systems with interesting dynamics with the sun and other planets. But Venus and Mars are kind of oddballs. Like Venus has a strong connection to solar activity and she has an ionosphere. So there is this ability for the sun's electric currents to connect at the ionosphere of Venus, but she doesn't have a magnetic field. And I'm just thinking like of the planets, like consciously, like Venus and Mars would definitely like to get together and become the bigger planet. Because if Mars flew into Venus or the two happened to like combine, now you'd have a bigger heavyweight than Earth in the inner solar system. And if they're close together in their orbits, they're actually not that far apart. So is there like perhaps some dynamic evolution of the solar system where at some point Venus and Mars combine together? Like we don't know. And then maybe new trans-Newtonian objects get pulled in and deposited in different shells around the sun. Like these are all ideas and possibilities that exist as so long as there's a sufficient perturbation that can bring them into order. And I think it's really all being driven by the consciousness of the sun, because we see really interesting planetary resonances around specific points in time where there's like a coordinated effort electromagnetically and or gravitationally to pull in certain energies from the cosmos. 1054 BC is a great example of that. We had this amazing planetary resonances sequence right on the Crab Nebula, supposedly 2 years before that supernova. This is 1052, where we had a Miyake event. And you have the cazimi of Mercury, Venus, and Mars, all with the sun, right at the Crab Nebula, and then also Jupiter. And then Jupiter lingers because it has a slower orbital revolution around the sun. So then it lingers, is able to hold in perhaps this vector of energy coming in the Crab Nebula, and then 2 years later, boom, supernova, and you get all this energy coming in. So it just seems coordinated. This really seems coordinated. This, people say the sun is middle-aged. Perhaps it is. I think, though, the sun, if it was able to get more material, it would choose to grow if it could. Does that at some point mean that it's going to take all the planets and bring it into it? I don't know. But maybe it uses the planets to actually pull in materials from other stellar systems or from like galactic circuits that may exist, because these fields drop via inverse square law. So if you have Jupiter at 5 AU and you have some strong, let's say, electromagnetic circuit coming in from a certain direction to the solar system, Jupiter being positioned there once every 12 years is going to enhance that gradient. Or Jupiter lining up with the the center of the galaxy, like all these things. There's so much in my mind right now as it relates to this and like I guess the what the history of the solar system may have been, what's actually at play right now, and what could potentially happen in the future. But I do think that there's this coordinated dance between all the planets and the sun that is much more coherent and elegant than people may realize. And I could actually see maybe these consciousnesses of the sun and planets actually having their own reality framework similar to ours. Um, they actually could be dancing in a ballroom together. Like,
Yeah. Beautiful. Yes. And you're basically talking about the whole ancient concept of the harmony of the spheres and that they are in this resonance, they are in this dance together, and perhaps held by a consciousness even larger than them. From my perspective, everything is a part of cosmic consciousness. So they're all fractal expressions of that in their own interaction and dance with each other.
yeah, an interesting point to that is, and this is why I study interdisciplinary, because you can often take, well, as Buckminster Fuller calls it, first principles. And these are truths that are true across everything, and they don't violate each other. And that's how you know they're first principles. If they violate each other, it's not a first principle. And so these truths, if they exist across everything, if you study into one thing, you should be able to, if you identify that first principle, just translate it over to the other domain. And so we can talk about biophysics and bioelectricity. And what we see is that the voltage gradient going through a cell or a group of cells influences the expression of that cell, its individual behavior, the group behavior of the cells, and the expression of the DNA. And the most poignant example of that is that if you have stem cells, so like for an embryo, where all the cells are still kind of like determining what they are, and this work was done by Michael Levin, if you change the cellular voltage gradient, it will alter what the cell actually decides to become. You take the cellular voltage gradient that you observe around the heart tissue that's forming in this little tadpole, and you apply it to the tail, you'll all of a sudden form a heart in the tail of that tadpole. And then you apply the tail voltage gradient back, and it converts back to tail tissue. So this is cells. This is what we see. Now, a lot, and Alvin talks about this, Hans Alvin, a whole bunch of other people, that there is a cellular structure to not only the solar system. We see that clearly with the density distribution across our solar system because we have the planets in various, orbital positions. There's a cellular structure to interstellar space, and then there's also a cellular structure to galactic and cosmic space, because you have all these different circuits nested together, and they necessarily create a division between active and active and passive plasma regions. And then, of course, if we look through a telescope, we'll see, empty space, and then there's a nebula, and there's a collection of gas in one location. So we have clear observational evidence of this. But if you have a larger galactic circuit that's passing through an area that's controlling whether there's energy inflow or it's actually causing energy outflow, there's your cellular voltage gradient. And the
Mm.
sun is the nucleus of the cell containing the DNA, you could say. The planets are different organelles. And so the formation of our solar system from the beginning, if there was a powerful galactic current running through our area, which, I mean, there has to be basically, then the development of our solar system from birth was guided by this larger field, just the same as one stem cell in us as we're an embryo becomes, let's say liver tissue. And so what purpose does our solar system play in this larger organism, you could say, of the cosmos? That's a good question. I mean, are we a brain cell? Are we a heart cell? Are we a toenail? Maybe we're the toenail.
Let's hope not.
Well, there's
Let's
worse
go for the
things.
hard sell.
Yeah.
But do
Um,
you think this is connected, Stefan, to the times when the galactic center is active, when it's in its active state? And right now, we know just recently in the last year, I think, that it's started to reactivate again, sending energetic currents into our sun, activating our solar system. Do you think that could be part of what generates these shifts that you're describing?
yeah, the question is, in my mind, or not a question really, but it's like we need to measure this. And so we have Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 just very slightly outside the edge of the heliosphere because the sun, as the center of this cell, for using this model, which I think works brilliantly, it creates its cell membrane with the heliosphere. And inside the cell, you have the cellular voltage gradient. So within the cell, the intercellular voltage gradient. Then, of course, you have the intracellular voltage gradients all around. That would be interstellar space. We only have Voyager 1 and 2 right now, and like they're literally about to get shut down because they're running out of energy and equipment's breaking, and they just pushed a code update to one of them that was successful. But we have most of the equipment's already offline, and so we've received some interesting data from crossing the edge of the heliopause into interstellar space, but there's this boundary as well. But we're going to enter into effectively, once they're offline, a gap where we're not getting any information in situ from interstellar space. We can measure neutral atoms because you have neutral gas all across the solar system and also interstellar space, gas that just simply isn't energized, so it's not affected by electromagnetic fields. So it's passing in, and we get, galactic cosmic ray flux and gamma ray emissions, all this. We're able to track some things coming from outside, but in terms of a very qualitative understanding of the interstellar local interstellar fields and circuit that we're in, we really don't know. Ideally, we would have like 100 of these bad boys out at various distances, and we should have kept sending Voyagers out nonstop all around. So when two went offline, it doesn't matter. We got 22 now. Hey, now we have 30. So we're entering into this period where we really aren't going to have any information, and it's going to take decades before we can perhaps get more information because we had to send another pair of probes out. We'll have New Horizons. So our understanding is super, super limited. So I am cautious in terms of um, stating with any certainty what is happening at the interstellar and galactic scale. That's kind of just my lead up to that. Undoubtedly, these things exist, but being able to pinpoint it, the source, this, that, whatever, I think that's exceedingly difficult now because we just simply don't even have the ability. The best thing I think we can do is looking at things like, okay, did a supernova blast off? Okay, that's a very clear source. We get the signal. Was there a gamma ray burst? We have the source, we have the signal. I think those sort of things are easy to track. But in terms of measuring the interstellar or galactic circuits and those flows of energy, I'm not really aware of any super easy way to do that, except maybe gravitational waves from the galactic center. I think we have an ability to measure that. But then we have to consider our time span. Like, hey, we've been measuring it for like 30 years. That's nothing. Like we have these really great ideas, and like I think just an intuition, the truth, like the truth just kind of resonates. I think just intuition helps us connect to these truths, and maybe someone could channel what's happening, that aspect. But scientifically, it's like we're pretty much in the dark.
Although, and you and I were talking before we got on the recording about David Clement's work, the theoretical physicist, and he talks a lot about how we need to remember how to reintegrate our ways of the mind understanding things, researching things, exploring things, and that knowing that can come through the heart that connects us to the consciousness of the cosmos and lets us access other ways of knowing. So you look at so many ancient cultures like the Dogon in Africa who knew details about Sirius A and Sirius B because they were accessing those other ways of knowing. And that to me is we're moving now into this new age and into the ascending consciousness of the Hindu Yuga cycle, the processional cycle. Those ways of knowing may open up for us again or are meant to open up for us again to access how we can tune in through that heart knowledge.
Yeah, and there are some ways to get like I guess you could say indirect evidence. So for example, if you go back to the planets being able to extend these gravitational or electromagnetic vectors because Jupiter at 5 AU, it's the big heavyweight gravitationally in its location in space. Or if you go out to Neptune at 30, now all of a sudden the sun can strengthen its gravitational field out to 30 AU. And especially if there's an alignment between multiple planets, then that really creates a nice vector going from the center of our solar system quite a bit further out. And then eventually it does diminish, but maybe there's an alignment of planet X in there and TNOs. Like we don't know. Again, if there's consciousness, then this could all be what's happening. Um, but one way to maybe track into this is finding those specific alignments and where they are in terms of true sky position and seeing what some of these celestial things on the other side of that are, like let's say the galactic center or the Crab Nebula with the sequence of planetary resonances I described in 1052 AD. That would be one way to perhaps pinpoint where there is a strong flow of interstellar or galactic energy, and that the sun and the planets together are purposely going to want to align to that circuit, and then they'll be more distributed, let's say, when they're not in alignment with the circuit, because that's their time. They all have different speeds, right? They're not all exactly in one line all the time, but they would perhaps want to converge together to align with that flow of energy, because if there is just a natural cooling, energetic cooling process that's unfolding across the solar system, you're going to want to bring energy in. I'm starting to think that maybe the ice ages, like in general, the solar system may be kind of in a cooling phase. And unless more energy is brought in, that's just going to continue. And I don't think the sun wants to cool off yet. I think the sun wants to grow a little bit more. So we seem to right now with the Younger Dryas, like what was the Younger Dryas? Was that some sort of alignment perhaps with a larger galactic circuit, which then brought energy in and caused that rapid increase in warming for the Earth and renewed solar activity? Like these are all just ideas, but there's also like Milankovitch cycles that can be used to explain some of these things, but they can't explain uh, these rapid variations in warming that we get over the past 50,000 years.
Although there's also comet activity, and there's a lot of evidence that there was a potential comet strike that triggered the massive flooding of the Younger Dryas period. So, I mean, I think that's a whole other factor that comes into play.
Yeah, there's
But
a whole
talk,
bunch of things.
but you've talked about the sense that our planet is currently in an electrification process and that that's really impacting some of the earthquake activity and what's happening with the shifting of the Earth's mantle. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What you mean by the electrification of the planet?
Yeah, it's really quite simple. We have hundreds of millions of years of prior energetic activity in our solar system, primarily with the sun. You know, the sun's been pumping out light for what we believe to be billions of years. And the Earth, as one little planet revolving around, figured out a way to sequester some of that energy. And so, hey, we got plants. Let's throw up some trees, and some of them are going to fall down into the swamp, and become fossil fuels and sequester down and become natural gas and oil and coal and more. And then humans come around and we figure out that we can exhume millions or even hundreds of millions of years of sequestered sunlight and release it like lighting a match, like that quickly. And so this is a big burst of energy that fundamentally was sequestered, and a lot of that energy is being just pumped out as thermal energy because internal combustion engine in a car or power plant, whatever, is just generating heat as one of its byproducts. The most of the energy is actually going into heat. So in general, there's just um, increased thermal effects as a result of all this. That's in general driving the planet to get warmer. But we are converting more and more and more of that energy into the radio frequency spectrum.
Yeah.
And so that is, I think, what's driving in large part this electrification process because those connect really strongly to water. And water has this ability to really hold on to gigahertz energy specifically. So like 5G and Wi-Fi all falls in there and every single cell phone now. So there is this just in general human-led push for just more energy on the planet. And I think at the same time, we are seeing this modern maximum of solar activity add into that. It's been 300 years. And sorry if you hear my stomach growling, folks. I just noticed my stomach is like, please feed me. And I think the sun may be feeling the same. It's like, can I get a galactic burst of energy, please? Um, but but I mean, it's just really like we don't have to. Everything is so political now and polarized. So like climate change. Let's just think of what the words are. It's just that the climate is changing, right? So of course that's always happening. And then let's just think about just the chemistry of fossil fuels is that you have a huge potential energy stored in a small density that's then able to be released exothermically. It's not complicated. So if you've been taking this energy and pumping it into a lot of these electromagnetic technologies, and you have solar activity at the same time, having had a 300-year peak, then yeah, you're going to see greater storm effects on our planet. And I think the Earth wants to become a little bit more like Jupiter. Uh, and she wants to have a little bit more power because she sees that maybe Venus and Mars are going to match up. And she's like, I got to figure something out, or else these two are going to outcompete me. So, these are all just ideas, but I could see, I'm just playing with the consciousness of it, and I could see how it could all happen, but probably not on a human timescale, but perhaps. I mean, we
And
just,
let's hope that they move out of that paradigm of competition into Aquarian collaboration so that we can all live in harmony again. Let's hope that's the trajectory. But just now going further out, you have done a lot of exploration and research on Sedna, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about Sedna and her very elongated 11,400 year orbit. And for me, I really see that correlating with these times of major shift in the precessional cycle, so that she becomes a messenger of that. She comes from the Oort cloud, bringing that star wisdom, and then comes close into our inner solar system and then goes all the way back out again. But she is in the part of her orbit where she's now closer to the inner solar system. But what's your sense of her and her energy?
yeah, I'm going to share my screen so I can show you Senna's orbit along with some others. So for the audience and for all of us here. So here we see the solar system. I'm going to zoom in, and I'll probably actually remove these tie lines, these drop lines on these things here. But we see, we can really zoom in there, we see our Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. And then I have the orbits of Makemake and Haumea loaded up. But Sedna here is Sedna's orbit. Very, very, very different than all the others. And super eccentric, has an inclination to it as well, you can see. And yeah, it travels out nearly 1,000 astronomical units based off of our limited ephemeris data to what would be the Oort cloud. Though some astronomers think the Oort cloud is actually starts actually much further out. I think in general you probably just get things everywhere in the solar system at different densities because we do see this ring structure. A great example is we have the inner solar system, and then we have the asteroid belt. Asteroid belt is a different density, distributed density than Jupiter and the other planets. So there's probably similar ring structures that we aren't yet aware of out in this orbit of Sedna. And so, yeah, the fact that it has that 11,000, approximately 11,400 year orbit lines up with the kind of like the great year and these astrological precessional cycles. So I think that might be variable. And maybe it's not 100% fixed to 26,000, 24,000 years, whatever it is. That's a whole different conversation.
Mhm.
Um, and that depends on what the sun is doing. But Sedna coming in, you have to think about, we talked about earlier how these planets, they become the dominant gravity players in their location because of the inverse square law. And so if you double the distance, the force drops off by 4. And so that scales really quickly. And so when you have Sedna all the way out 1,000 astronomical units, and Sedna has a diameter of about 1,000 or 1,200 kilometers, something like that. I think it's about 1,000 kilometers. You know, it's a big object. Not as big as Pluto, but you know, fairly close. It's going to be by far the dominant gravitational player in its local zone, unless it happens to be right next to something else which is bigger, which is possible, like maybe a planet X, or planet X is. There, who knows? But I would then think as Sedna comes in, you know, there's a lot of comets which are a lot smaller than Sedna and objects, like 10 kilometers across. Sedna could cause a general flow of objects towards the inner solar system because it's going out, and you could say it's like mining, like deep mining in space, and then causing this Sedna shift where as Sedna comes in, it's probably also dragging in tow some other things which were small enough to be influenced by its dominant gravitational field, and they just kind of floated in because the solar gravitational field is very weak at that point, still dominant, but still very weak. Sedna comes in immediately, like you can consider like magnetizes it, but rather just kind of nudges it, and now they start to flow perhaps along a similar trajectory. Um,
Interesting.
and so that would, I'm going to stop sharing because it started to freak out. But I could see Sedna's perihelion approach in 2076 also corresponding perhaps with a deluge of what we would call interstellar visitors. And perhaps we're already seeing that with the Oumuamua and then 3I Atlas and you know these other ones which are coming in kind of along that ecliptic plane. And some people are saying that that's quite bizarre and anomalous, and it is, but we do see the planets already, you know, grouping up on the ecliptic plane in general, and then TNOs defy that. But
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot more to Sedna than people realize because of its unique orbital properties. The fact that it is going super far out into deep space, and the fact that it's getting close to perihelion, which last time it was there was right with the beginning of human civilization as we know it, with the pre-pottery Neolithic, as evidenced by Göbekli Tepe and the other tepes, which means mound in Turkish. So these ancient archaeological sites dating back to 9600 BCE or so, something like that. And so does that mean that, I mean, will this feed a bunch of interstellar comets and material into the outer planet conveyor belt, which then eventually it's Jupiter and maybe gets flung into the inner solar system or the asteroid belt? I don't know. It could represent some sort of recharging of material into the solar system from deep space. And maybe that's how Chiron got into its orbit. And Chariklo and these other centaurs, maybe they were originally mined um, from way out beyond Neptune from things like Sedna. Because Sedna, Chiron's 220 kilometers in diameter or so. It's the third largest centaur. It's not the largest. Sedna's quite a bit larger. Maybe it's able to nudge it in position or just that tip, domino tip, and then it just kind of slots in and the consciousness directs it to where it needs to be. And
That's fascinating because most of the centaurs have unstable orbits. So that would actually make a lot of sense. And it is interesting that there is scientific evidence that there was comet activity that struck the Earth that was involved with the Younger Dryas crisis, and that Göbekli Tepe may have been built shortly after that. And there, Graham Hancock and others are showing how Pillar 43 in particular may be symbolizing the timing of that crisis. And also, Graham Hancock thinks it's signaling this time now. So maybe they understood these larger cycles that may connect with Sedna and other planetary bodies that impact these events on the Earth.
yeah, um, yeah, I don't have the answers, but I think there's definitely more to. I don't think Sedna is just swinging by and it's going to be like, "Hey, what's up?" That's it. I think there's probably going to be a lot more that we realize. And I think half of it is just you have to take your brain there. You have to take your consciousness to those locations, and then you get that information. It's like scrying, or I consider in many aspects universe to be like the most ultra supercomputer. And I think any question that you ask God will get answered eventually. It has a log of everything, and eventually gets to you and spits out the answer. And God is really good like that. So I think it's really just about taking yourself to these zones, um, and just contemplating what the potential is, not just necessarily what the current understanding mainstream belief is, which is very static and fixed, and nothing ever changes and nothing ever happens. And
And it's random and meaningless
yeah.
and very well said. And I love that you talk to the sun. And I think, along those lines, we need to be in communication with Sedna. And part of what I do with my Aquarian Shamanic Astrology program is teach the group how to do shamanic journeys to the planets so that they
Mm.
can communicate to us what their energies are, what their meaning is. So I think that that can be a growing edge for us in our explorations. But thank you, Stefan, for the work that you're doing and the innovative integration that you're doing. And how is it best for people to connect with you? There's your YouTube channel, but also I want to put a link to your other website below. And I also want to strongly recommend your planetary resonance class. That's on which is that on uh your
So
primary website?
yeah, I have two websites now. So my YouTube channel is just at Stefan Burns. That's STEFANBURNS. And then I have my original website is wildfreeorganic.com, and that's where I sell the earthing shoes currently, which you have a pair of, which I'm glad that they're working out so well for you. Um, so that you can find those on Wild Free Organic, but also that's where the e-course currently lives. And so that was basically my way of really getting up to snuff with astrology, mythology, and astronomy for our solar system, and then expanding that out a bit to the precessional cycle, interstellar space, the astrological ages, and more. And so it's 15 hours of video content for that. And if you it doesn't have all the answers, and not all of it's going to be 100% correct in the long run, but if you go through that planetary resonances e-course, which is wildfreeorganic.com/planetary-resonances, you will certainly have a big upgrade in your ability to understand sometimes what I'm talking about on my channel, what you talk about on your channel, what other people are discussing as it relates to TNOs and more, because we have an entire section on that. The synodic cycles of the planets is super important. Of course, we have an entire module on Mercury, Venus, Moon, Mars, right? So you learn all the foundations of that basically. Um, but that bridging of astronomy, the astronomical characteristics with the astrology is super important. Like if you were just to study Sedna from an astrology perspective, you wouldn't consider like, okay, what's its mass, its diameter, its gravitational field impact? It's going to perhaps drag things into the inner solar system because its perihelion is like 75 AU or something. So it's close enough to maybe fling things in. If you don't study astronomy, you'll just never have that ability to like maybe do the next level of um, not research, but kind of you won't reach that next level of understanding of perhaps what the significance of Sedna being, and Sedna being this deep transformation into power um, at like in the deep abyss. There's something there. Is the Sedna shift perhaps going to trigger like increased underwater volcanic activity because we talked earlier before we started about how there seems to be resonance with Haumea, Maki Maki, and the Alpine Fault in New Zealand, 300-year cycles for all of those, and the inclinations are the same. So I think these celestials have abilities to affect the Earth in ways that we do not currently know or understand, but we can kind of start to think about and guess at. Um, and so, yeah, it's kind of useful to get an understanding, a base understanding of this stuff before you just launch into it. And so that's all in the course. But you're also talking about it, I'm talking about it. So there are also a lot of free resources as well.
But that's so powerful because it is showing how those things, those energies impact the earth, but also our consciousness. And I love that you also weave in the mythology because I think we learned so much about Sedna from that Inuit myth of Sedna also. So thank you for the work that you're doing, Stefan. I really love following your YouTube channel and know you're constantly on a growing edge. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Doing my best. Thank you so much. And yeah, hope you all enjoy the conversation, folks.
And thank you to everyone listening. Blessings and love to all of you.